Welcome to Dad Rocks, a podcast for dads who love music, made by dads who love music.
Hello and welcome to Dad Rocks, the podcast about being a dad and loving music and how the two intersect in our lives. I'm your host Josh, and today my guest is Chris Bolger. Chris is a multi-talented musician who has been a staple of the North Jersey music scene for several decades. Not only is he a great musician, but he is also an engineer and has produced other local artists around the area for a long time. He's worked with the likes of R. Stevie Moore, members of the Smithereens, and a multitude of other musicians who have worked with or have played with very famous musicians. Chris is well connected again in the North Jersey music scene. If you remember from our episode with Mark Moran a couple of months ago, Chris's name was brought up a lot by Mark, not only because Mark is a good friend of Chris's, but Chris kind of knows everybody or seems to know everyone in North Jersey. He's played a lot of gigs around the area, and he's just one of these kinds of guys who should have been on the show a long time ago. I've known Chris for about 25 years or so, and he and my dad were good friends, I would say, for the last 7 or 8 years of my dad's life. And he and my dad played music together. They went to shows together. And, after my dad passed, Chris kind of came along and kind of became a musical mentor for me. I played gigs with him. He opened my ears up to bands like Big Star and Jellyfish and basically power pop in general, even though I kind of liked the music before. He kind of guided me to different artists in that realm. Again, this has been a long time coming for me having Chris on the show, and I probably should have had him on earlier, but today I have him on. I forgot to mention he is also the father to two now adult children, and he just became a grandfather to a young grandson, which we will mention at the top of the interview. This was a great conversation. I had a great time learning a little bit more about Chris than I knew, even though I've known him for a long time. And you'll get to hear that very shortly. One thing I do want to say, though, real quick is this episode took me a little longer than I wanted to put out, and that's just because life has kind of taken on. There's more stuff going on, basically. I have a little less time to work on things like this now that both my kids are a little older, and I got to be on top of things more. And just my job now has asked me to do some more stuff. And I say this because while I hope that I'm able to continue this podcast, there is always that chance that things are just going to kind of slow down and maybe peter out. So I just want to say, if this is the last episode, which I hope it's not, I really don't think it will be, or if this is, the last episode for a while, I do want to thank everyone who listens to the podcast regularly or has listened to it even on and off. Thank you for your support over the last 4 years or so. Is it 4 years? Yeah, it's been 4 years. So again, thank you again for your support and, listening to the show. So without further ado, I will now present you my conversation with Chris Bolger. Chris, welcome to Dad Rocks.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. I just got over COVID, so I'm feeling much better. And
you're a dad who rocks.
Yes, I am. So how are things? I mean, first off, congratulations on your grandchild, your grandson.
Yeah.
How do you?
Yeah, his name is Tristan.
Oh, well, congrats. I heard it was a crazy story of his birth. Yeah. But how do you feel entering this next chapter of your life?
Grandfatherhood as a working musician, part-time musician. It's exciting. I knew I was going to be happy about it. My daughter and her husband Michael we knew that they would want kids, and they have one now. So that's all great. And Ruth is ecstatic. And, we don't, they live an hour and 15 minutes away. So we can't be there all the time, but we get to see them enough.
Yeah, I know that, I live 35, 40 minutes away, hour with bad traffic from my mom, and she comes up as much as she can, but of course she wishes she was much closer, whereas my brother's
Sure.
like 10 minutes away. So I know that can be definitely challenging.
Sure.
And, so have you had any inspiration, musical inspiration from having, a grandson or anything like that, in terms of maybe new ideas writing or that kind of stuff?
I did write one song, which isn't specifically about that, but it's a song called People to Love. And it's just, I think it's a song of gratitude, just about, you know, thank you for giving me people to love, people in my life that I care about, and I guess they care about me.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
And, do you find yourself in a different, I don't know, feeling or like
Frame
a
of
different,
mind?
yeah, a different frame of mind. There you go. Like now that you're a grandfather in terms of seeing this young child.
Well, I'm still mystified that I was ever allowed to reproduce in the first place. And now it's gone another generation, but no, it's everything carries on pretty much the way that it has, with the exception of, now I have somebody else to visit, and now watch him grow like I watch my children grow. I have a favorite picture of me and Laura when Laura was, oh, she had to be under 2 years old. And I think I'd come home from work and I'm still wearing like a heavy flannel kind of shirt jacket thing. And she's asleep in my arms, and she's got her favorite stuffed animal. And she's got this really sweet, angelic smile on her face. And she's absolutely adorable, and she's out cold. But so now there'll be another generation of that.
Yeah.
I did, the last time I was over there, I was giving Laura a break a bit, and I was carrying them around and singing them lullabies and things like that. So that's, and will the songs come out of it? Yeah, sooner or later.
Yeah.
No,
I just wasn't sure if you had any current moments of inspiration, because I know for some people it happens immediately and sometimes it happens later on, or not at all, but just was,
Yeah.
just curious.
Inspiration, the craziest things, like, for some reason, I guess I was thinking about situations, especially some nonsense going on where I work. And, it's the old political statement: you can fool some of the people some of the time, and some of the people all the time. And my ending to that is, you can't fool me anymore. And I guess, that's a cadence that's running around in my head. Obviously not related to my family.
Yeah.
But inspiration comes from all kinds of funny places, as far as writing. Um, Seeing something interesting, seeing something scary, seeing something wonderful, and that's, and sometimes it's just a musical phrase, you don't, and where those things come from is still a mystery.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, in terms of parenting, have you reflected on your own early experiences as a parent, and in giving any kind of,
I wouldn't have the audacity to give advice.
yeah, that kind of
Everybody
stuff.
gives advice and nobody wants it.
Or just even thinking back on, your own
definitely
experiences and be
reflect.
in terms of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, like I said, it carries me back to that particular photograph, of cradling my daughter in her arms, and now she's cradling her son in her arms.
Yeah. It's got to be interesting, kind of even when our youngest, when Daniel was born, just going through the whole process 4 years later was like, oh my God, okay, I got to remember what we did, what our approach was. Should we do anything differently? And obviously you're in a different position being the grandfather versus, father.
Right.
But, I have to think that some sort of like, not deja vu moments, but like similar experiences? You're like, oh, I remember when this happened and this is what we
Oh
did,
yeah.
kind of thing.
Right. And of course, right now it's still very early. Tristan was only born on the 4th of July, and he was, 5 weeks premature.
Mm-hmm.
So, he's just kind of catching up with the curve now as
Yeah.
far as, development. So well, he hasn't really smiled yet
Mm.
but he is kind of active, which is interesting,
That's
you
good.
know. Yeah. And he's looking around, looking at things,
Yeah.
what he makes of any of it.
Yeah. And, kind of thinking in that same mold, obviously your daughter is, she teaches, right? She's a French teacher.
Well, she got her BA in French, and she actually is an ESL teacher.
Okay.
English as a second language.
Yeah. So,
You know that. They
yeah.
wouldn't know
Yeah. And so, I mean, just thinking back, kind of to when you were starting as a parent
that. Mhm.
and to kind of bring in your music career, when your kids were born, like, how did that change, your gigging schedule? Did it affect
Oh,
it? And, did you go from gigging like almost every night to, not nearly as often?
well, what happened, when my first, which is Laura, was born, my day job was I'm an electrician, and I happened to be working for a contractor where I had to be on site at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Mm.
So you now Ruth is also a teacher, and she took time off. So at that point, I was the sole breadwinner for that period of time,
Right.
and I had to be on site early. And so that was the first time since I was in my teens that I actually took time off from performing for people. And going back, because I'd never had a layover like that before. And going back the first couple of times, it was kind of like, can I still do this? And am I going to be any good at it? And of course, it's like riding a bicycle. You get back on and you do it.
Yeah.
That's all.
No, it's quite interesting that you just basically stopped, doing any gigs. And obviously that makes sense. If you have to get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, you can't be out till like midnight, 2 o'clock or whatever, gigging.
And that's back when the club scene, many, many gigs that you would do at that point, back then, a lot of times you would stop at 1:30 in the morning playing, but you still had to pack up and then drive home.
Yes.
I
was curious because, one of the challenges I had when David was born, was this cover band that I was playing with, the guys I'd play with. We started ramping things up right before he was born, and then he was born, and then we started getting some gigs. And like, again, granted it was the weekend, but we would start at 10 and I wouldn't be home till 3. And I was, and trying to balance all of that with parental duties and making sure your wife wasn't too upset about it.
That's a whole other story.
Yeah. I mean, like, and so I was just curious, how you juggled it, but obviously if you just straight up, stopped, I can imagine when your son was born at that point, you were gigging again. And did that,
at that point, Ruth didn't take as much time off, for one thing. When Chris was born, my mom was helping out, and so that, because my mom was retired at that point, and so she was able to help out more, and she lived nearby. She only lived a few blocks away from us, so that worked out at that time. But actually, at one point, I was laid off from work, and that was after I had built a home studio.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I just basically about 6 weeks, I suppose, I actually was working on what would have been a record called April's Fool. And because April was when I got laid off. And basically, Ruth was going to be off for the summer in June. So I had this kind of 6 weeks where I was a house husband.
Yeah.
And fortunately for me, I had already kind of built the home studio, and Chris was a very good napper. So I had this really ideal situation for a little while where, would get up in the morning, do breakfast, play with him and whatever for a while. Then he'd get tired and take a nap. I'd go downstairs and write a song and record it, because I had the time to do that. And by the time I was pretty much done with it, either he was waking up or Ruth was getting home from work.
Gotcha.
So I got away with murder for a while.
And you know, was did you get any, kind of the similar question that I had earlier? Did you get any inspiration for songs when your kids were born?
Oh yeah. Not so much when they were born, but as I watched them get older and see them, like um, I guess I wrote quite a few songs about kind of Laura was a very independent kid, and she was also kind of serious sometimes,
Mhm.
and so that definitely was some songs came out of that, just wanting, because they're your children, you love them, you want to be able to help them through the things that they go through, going through, just growing up.
Yeah.
That's when they're little, you're kind of, you are their world for a while anyway. And but then they start living their own lives a little bit more and more all the time, as it should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
And did you, getting curious, like, did you ever have to turn down any major gigs because either,
because of family ties.
yeah,
Um, nothing that I really missed. You know, the only ones that the only significant gigs that I had to turn down were usually because I was committed somewhere else. There is, you have to have certain ethics if you're going to keep doing music, and playing bands. And, I know guys that I don't have a lot of respect for that, you know, they commit to a gig and then something comes out where they could make double the money or triple the money, and then without enough notice,
right,
especially they blow it off, and all of a sudden you're stuck trying to find a keyboard player or whatever, and I don't cotton to that, and that has cost me once or twice, where I could have gotten a chance to play with somebody that I was really looking forward to, or get in with a clique of musicians who get better gigs that
mm,
pay more money.
yeah,
But you don't do that. At least I don't.
right.
You know.
And yeah, that's. I mean, I understand why people would do it, but I personally too would not do something like that, especially if you've committed to something down the road. But
Well, especially when you have other people depending on
yeah,
you too.
absolutely.
That's.
And that,
Uh,
it's understandable if it's something like, oh, my wife broke her leg and I have to watch the kids versus like, I got a
well,
better paying gig.
just somebody offered me more money is not an acceptable reason.
Right.
I mean, if okay, let's say it's 2 months out to the date, and the gig that you're offered is exponentially more money. You can try and find a sub for it, and if that's going to work for the people that you're. But once you've committed, unless it's really extreme circumstances, you don't do it. And if those extreme circumstances do show up once in a blue moon, you know, if you can't find a suitable replacement, you still don't do it.
Yeah.
You know.
I started playing this damn guitar when I was just 12 years old. For all my sweat and my calluses, what haven't got to show? I got a big.
When your kids were little and growing up,
Mhm.
did you consciously try to expose them to different music, or did things happen organically? I it's something that I look back on, and I probably try to force too much music onto my son rather than trying to let him be exposed to a whole bunch of stuff or just find what he likes. My older son, and then with Daniel, is just like whatever's around is what he's listening to. So
Right.
I didn't know if you played music in the house, see what your kids gravitated to, or if you put certain children's music on, like what was going on as your kids were growing up.
Well, one of the things that we used to do that was really kind of fun is, I have a bunch of 45 singles, and we had a turntable in the living room, and we used to have dance
Oh,
parties.
nice.
And I'd pull out all these things like Surfing Bird by the Trash. And that's the kind of stuff. Bird,
Yeah.
bird, bird, bird's the word. That a 4-year-old can relate to. You know? So, that was, I guess, one way in which I did expose them to music. And obviously with me playing guitar around the house and musicians coming by from time to time, they had that exposure. What it ended up with, Laura, and I'm not sure how or why, but she took Suzuki violin and she continued to play violin for a long time. She doesn't have much time for it these days, but she has all those years of studying, behind her, and she played in high school orchestra and that sort of thing. Chris, on the other hand, he took up bass for a little while in grammar school because he loved his teacher.
Yep.
And
Great teacher.
and Mr. McHugh.
Yep. He was my elementary school teacher too. He's
Right.
amazing.
Great guy. And then when he went to middle school, he didn't want to play anymore. So that was the end of it. But there's instruments around the house, and they were always, it wasn't like don't touch Dad's guitars.
Right.
They wanted to touch Dad. I was all for it, and I gave them each guitars at different points. But Laura surprised me one time. We went on it was actually a Boy Scout camping trip, but a family one.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's a girl around a bunch of boys that were younger than her, like Cub Scouts, and she had nothing to do, and I had brought along a baritone uke, and she spent the whole time that we were away learning to play the baritone uke,
wow.
and then she never picked it up again. But I'm hearing her plunking away on it. I was like, wow, I'm impressed. And that was, but she still has her violin.
Yeah.
That's the big thing.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And did did they have, favorite artists, growing up, or like, favorite music? Did you end up because I know, we've been family friends for a long time, and
Sure.
we've gone to a bunch of shows together, but I didn't know if they you took them to concerts a lot, or,
They didn't really have any interest in that. I took Chris, oddly enough, not that long ago, I guess just before COVID. A friend of mine had given me a pair of tickets to see Kiss
Oh, nice.
in Madison Square Garden. And I'd never taken Chris to a concert, so I asked him if he wanted to go. And so the two of us went to Madison Square Garden to see Kiss. So that was a fun evening out.
Yeah.
And it's very different for us, and they've come out to see me play any number of times,
Right.
Usually when it's someplace close by and convenient, but there was one kind of major show that I did down in Cape May Courthouse when I was with an oldies band called the Yesterdays, and they all came down for that, and that's a hike,
Yeah.
But it was actually me with the band, the Yesterdays, and Jim Yester, who's the lead singer from the Association, or one of them, and an orchestra.
Oh,
So
wow.
that was unusual. You don't get to do that very often, so everybody came down for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, I was just curious because I know that you love live music. You love, and
Yeah.
and so I didn't know if that your kids kind of had that similar interest, and
Not too much. I mean, they both can sing. Laura sang church choir, but they didn't get the ham gene from me, so they don't like performing in front of people. Chris has a nice voice, but he doesn't like singing for people. But he'll sing just walking around the house, So
And
it's in there somewhere.
even though they weren't so into music to going to shows, did they expose you to any music that you might not have listened to that you're like, oh, this is pretty good?
Well, the only thing along those lines is because Chris is way into gaming, and a lot of games now have really big orchestrated soundtracks, and see he listens to that stuff, so I hear that sometimes, and that's something very different. It's usually integrated. I guess they have huge budgets, and they actually integrate symphony orchestras with synthesizers, and and I guess it's hard to know how much of it is synthetic and how much of it is real, because of course samples now are amazing. So, but I think they have actually used some, like out in California, they still have studios that'll record orchestras.
Yeah.
I think some of that was done out there.
They actually, a couple buddies of mine went to Dingbats and saw a band play like video game music live while somebody was actually playing the video game. I think it was like either Legend of Zelda or something like that. So
Yeah.
like
That's one of the big ones for Chris.
Yeah. And I mean that would be, I think, an interesting experience seeing that, seeing a metal band play
Well, it's almost like kind of like in a way like Trans-Siberian Orchestra and and that's really almost like a throwback to which I was something that I was too young for, especially in the days of silent movies, they would have a big organ that they would have in the theater, and they'd do accompaniment to these movies on the organ.
Yeah.
And Ed Alstrom's done that a couple
Yeah,
of
at the
times.
Lowe's. I know he did it at the Lowe's Theater, yeah.
Yep. Which is, that's a pretty amazing thing. I don't know if I'm a fan of a lot of science fiction, and Giorgio Moroder did a soundtrack for Metropolis.
Oh, did he? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, there's a version of Metropolis. I think it's colorized too, and Giorgio Moroder did the soundtrack, a new soundtrack for Metropolis.
Did he? He did.
Yeah.
Did he do the one for Tron? No, I don't. No, he didn't do that. I'm thinking.
Yeah,
I'm thinking that he was connected with Daft Punk, who did the soundtrack for the newer Tron movie.
Right.
So that's what I was thinking. Going from your kids' childhoods growing up, when you were growing up, like what kind of exposure did you have to music? Were your parents musical? Was there a lot of music going on in the house? Like, how did you kind of get the bug?
Well, that's kind of an unusual story. Okay. And it's a little dark. My father had a stroke when I was 5.
Oh my God, I'm sorry.
But we couldn't have loud noise around the house, and so there wasn't a lot of music playing in the house. And it's funny because my mom loved music and she used to sing, but the house for quite a few years had to be kept pretty quiet. So mostly the way I'd hear music would be when we were traveling in the car on AM radio. AM radio, of course, back then was a lot more diverse and more interesting because, you could hear Sinatra and the Beatles and Herb Oscar Anderson and, novelty songs. I mean, that was what was on AM radio, before the rise of FM. It was pretty diversified for the time. So that's how I got exposed to some music. And I had a fascination from the time I was 2 with record players. And so I had records because I was just fascinated with the mechanics of it, that you put a disc on this turntable and it spins around, you put the arm on it and sound comes out. And to me, that was like magic. So I had records, even though I had to watch, playing them too loud in the house and stuff. So, and like at places like Woolworths, I guess they would have, it was almost like cutouts. I remember they would have these, it would be like a bag of like 3 or 4 45s at a discount because, we didn't have a lot of money. So they'd be at, like 3 or 4 records packed in a plastic bag, singles. And it might've been by somebody that you knew, or it might've been a failed single or whatever, but I'd have these weird 45s that I got that way. And then later on, I had a sort of a mentor, a guy named Tom Parnham. He actually, one of the songs on my CD is kind of an honor in honor of him. But he ran a TV repair shop around the corner, and I used to hang out there. And he was also the chief engineer at WSOU radio station, Paul's radio station. So he would take me around with him when he would go to pick up TVs to repair, and he would take me over to the radio station. And they had kind of a discard bin. And so I got a lot of records from that. And that was kind of in the era of a lot of garage rock bands and stuff,
Yeah.
Bands. There was a band called The Creatures, not the 80s, this was late 70s, 80s. This was like in the 60s.
Yeah.
They had a song called Turn Out the Light. It sounded kind of like the Rolling Stones. But I got all these weird singles, and sometimes they were hits. They'd somehow gotten doubles or triples, So that's kind of where my how I got exposed to music,
Do you still have those 45s? Still?
No, I was hard on stuff like that, and I don't have 45s from then. I still collect 45s and albums. I love my vinyl. You know,
Yeah, I'm sure you got an amazing collection there.
I do.
So, you know,
Very disorganized though,
well, it happens. I mean,
like me.
yeah. So knowing you and you know your what you like, I have to assume that a band like the Beatles was very influential. But I could be wrong. Like you know
Sure.
who.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, who were like the bands that like kind of opened the door to you wanting
my
to
fuse?
play? Yeah.
Okay. Um, I mean, yeah, the Beatles. You know, when the Beatles came to the United States, you know, when I Want to Hold Your Hand came out and was all over the radio, I was 6.
Mm-hmm.
But you had to be living under a rock not to experience Beatlemania. I mean, you know, people in third world countries knew about the Beatles.
Right.
People that didn't have radios or record players or anything else, they knew about the Beatles.
Yeah.
So, you know, so yeah, I got caught up and saw them on Ed Sullivan and all that. Um, and so, yeah, I was into that. I also like Chubby Checker.
Great. You
And,
know, the twist,
yeah,
twist
the
again.
twist. Yeah, which was also that was kind of a dance phenom at the time. I had older cousins, and they were kind of college students in the early '60s. So I got exposed to Tom Paxton and the Kingston Trio. I liked them a lot, and because you know we're Irish American, my family, um, you know that was a big thing. Clancy Brothers. My father approved of that. You know, when he was a little better and could listen. He loved the Clancy Brothers. And again, you think of that as, you know, I guess what ethnic music or whatever, but they were contemporaries and label mates with Bob Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel.
Right.
And, you know, so they were really in that same clique. So, and my sister was into that stuff too, because she kind of hung around with my cousins. They were older. My cousins were older. So she hung around with that. And when she was going to college, she was into the whole singer-songwriter thing, Carly Simon, James Taylor. So that was the first stuff. I was big into Cat Stevens. When I really started playing guitar, Cat Stevens was big. The Who became huge for me. You know, love the Who.
Yeah. I mean, they, as a young teen, why wouldn't you love the Who? You know, especially with the aggression and yet still great melodies and just, you know,
right.
The
kids are all right.
Yeah. So when did you start playing guitar? Was it your first instrument, or did you play piano first, or when did that all start happening? Especially since, you know, I didn't know that your dad had a stroke, so obviously you couldn't be too loud in the house. So, you know, how did that all start?
Well, again, because and this is all you know, everybody tracks back to the Beatles. You know, that's of a certain age. I guess the following Christmas, maybe my brother Frank and my sister Loretta both got guitars, terrible cheap guitars, and my sister stuck with it. Frank didn't, so I kind of, you know, I was, you know, I wasn't even 7 yet. I wasn't taking lessons, but I would play around with his guitar, and that sort of started my fascination with it. And then I finally was able to buy a guitar. Found one in the want ad papers or something like that for $15, you know, and it actually wasn't a half bad guitar, but unfortunately I broke the neck on it. Anyway, but yeah, I had some cheap guitars, but I started playing around with it when I was 12, and then, you know, I was really, you know, I took to it like, you know, a lot, and so then by the time I was 15, I was accomplished enough that my sister, who had still been playing all along, she started taking me with her to like coffee houses and things like that. So I started playing in front of people when I was about 15. And, you know, that playing, you know, being 15, playing for stoned college students, you know, you had to develop a thick skin really fast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so you're 15. You're going to coffee houses. What are you playing? Like, are you playing folk music, or are you playing just acoustic versions of popular stuff? Because by that time, we're talking early 70s. So
early, almost mid. Yeah. Like 73, 74. At that point, I was probably still playing sort of singer-songwriter, folksy stuff. Definitely Cat Stevens by then. Um, One of the first things I ever learned to play was Wild World. And so that was one of the first things. And I would probably play the stuff I heard my sister and her friends and my cousins playing. So it was still probably kind of folky um and 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 acoustic, but I was into electric guitar, but of course you didn't take electric guitars to coffee houses. I did have one by then. A terrible one, but I had one. And then my first really decent guitar that I got was in 1973. I got a Gibson SG Junior, which there was a guy a couple of blocks away that I'd pay him $5 and he would teach me stuff. His name was Chris Smith, and he was getting a new guitar and he was selling this Gibson SG Junior, and so that was the first good guitar I got.
You still have that?
It was stolen, but in the early 90s, I actually got an exact replacement of it.
Okay. Nice.
I had bad luck with that. I had 3 Gibson guitars stolen over the years. That's kind of what set me off collecting.
Yeah.
Because I had the SG Junior stolen, and then when I went to music school, when I went to Berkeley, I had a Fender Princeton amp, and I had an acoustic guitar. I had a Gibson J200 that then cost $600. I worked for $1 an hour to buy that guitar. 600 hours to buy a guitar. Working as a busboy. And I worked all through the summer and saved up all that money, and I bought that guitar. And then that was stolen, and the amp, when I was at Berkeley. And then I was partners in a little music shop for a while, and somebody broke through the side window and stole my personal guitar, which was after the J200 got stolen. I got an SG Standard because I needed an electric guitar to be playing gigs, and that got stolen.
Oh, jeez.
So then I started collecting guitars.
Yeah. So when did you transition from playing coffee houses? Obviously, you got the performing bug, but to playing in full-on rock bands.
I was in a popular country rock band when I was in high school. And it was kind of funny because I was all into this stuff, but like the Eagles, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and the band eventually sort of leaned a little more towards Southern rock and Allman Brothers, and I wasn't really into that at that point. I was now a rabid Who and Todd Rundgren fan. So so I got tired of the country rock, and I really wasn't into the Southern rock thing. So then I started playing in bands that did, rock and power pop. Power pop was always the big thing for me.
Yeah.
Which goes back to the Who and the Beatles.
Exactly.
And, Badfinger was huge for me. I love them. I really discovered them with No Matter What, which came out in 1970. I played that record to death, so much that I pissed my father off, and he actually took his cane and smashed it on the turntable.
Oh God!
Yeah, I think I played it on too many times.
So you play in a country rock band, and when did? So is this like junior, senior?
That's in high school. And from I guess sophomore, junior and senior, and then I went away to Berkeley, and I came back and I still played with those guys when I got back. I was a Berkeley dropout. I stay there. That's where my J200 got stolen. It was when I was up at Berkeley. It kind of soured me.
Yeah.
Now.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. No, because I was just curious. So I guess you were like, at what point did you realize that this is something you really wanted to pursue? Because when you go to Berkeley, this is what you want to do. So
yeah.
And were your parents at all a little hesitant when you said, I want to go music school?
I think, my father had already passed away at that point. He eventually died from complications about 10 years later. he actually died in 73. He had the stroke in 63 and died in 73. Um, but my mom, I think she didn't know much about it, and that just seemed to be the direction that I was going in. So she, well, you got to do something. You may as well study music. So I did for a little while, but I was a terrible student, and then, you know, I, whenever anybody asks about Boston, which is, that's where Berkeley is,
Yeah.
I have no use for Boston. Because basically, not only did my guitar get stuck, I also stole, and I was also mugged while I was there.
Oh God.
So,
Yeah.
so to this day, I have nothing good to say about Boston.
How
Uh,
were you there for just one semester, or did you stay for a year? Or
I started the second semester, and then after the guitar got stolen first, and then I got mugged, and then I was like, I'm coming home.
yeah.
I'm done.
Now
You know.
I'm just curious because I think the time frames are similar or based on age. You weren't because one of my former guests, but also family friend and a guy who played with my dad, Dave Rubin, was Berkeley guy,
Mhm.
and he was roommates with Bill Frisell. Were you there at the? I mean, I don't know because obviously it's a
I was
big
there
school.
in the fall of 75 is when I started, and I was gone by
Okay.
maybe February of 76 or something. So I did a semester and began a second one, and then I was just, after that happened, I was done.
Yeah. Did you make any connections up there? Did you meet anyone who you're still musically that you connected with that you still maybe have some
Nobody
contact
that I'm
with?
still in touch with. I had friends up there and people that played music. I was in a church band up there. There was a Catholic church right across the street from Berkeley, and I used to play in the church band. It was all college students, but I didn't really. The only There's a guy named Dave who became a rep for um, Ovation Guitars, and I used to see him sometimes because just working in music stores, and he'd come in repping for him. So so he was about the only one that from Berkeley that I had any contact with later on.
Yeah.
I haven't seen him in years.
This is Brendan Benson, and you're listening to Dad Rocks.
When you came back to New Jersey, like, what was the scene like? Because, this is for me. And when I was talking to Mark Moran, I was trying to get some info out of him too. And I know he's good friends with you. You're good friends with him.
Oh yeah.
I was thinking about at that time, in terms of music, like I knew my dad played in the late 60s, early 70s.
Right.
And then at that time he had gone to chiropractic school and was like getting into jazz and bluegrass and all of that. And so the rock scene was like, he never talked about it. So
It wasn't his thing, really.
And then, but now learning about, what was going on in New York at the time, obviously with the punk scene, and, just knowing all these people in New Jersey.
Right.
I know that there was a lot of, great clubs and concert venues. So what was the scene like, the local scene like? Was it mainly cover bar bands, or was there a lot of, original bands
for a
too?
while there were a lot of original clubs, and there were more of them in Manhattan, and in New Jersey. I guess I used to hang around and play at the Dirt Club, which was in Bloomfield. There was another place called the Jetty, which was also in Bloomfield. There was Hitsville. There was Englanders. These were all original music clubs. So besides there were plenty of clubs, the Towpath and Dodds, and then out in Rockaway or Dover, the Show Place, which had original bands, but they also had bands like the Ramones,
wow.
New York punk bands and stuff. And I'm trying to remember. There's another one in Passaic.
Well, there's the Capitol Theater was in Passaic.
Capitol Theater was in Passaic. And yeah, I saw shows at the Capitol. And I guess the next thing, besides, playing local bars and stuff, I began to really write when I was about 24, and I bought a 4-track machine. I also went to the Institute of Audio Research for a little while, and I started to apprentice in a recording studio in New York. And at that time, the recording scene was very cocaine fueled, and that was not for me. So, I worked in one studio in New York, and 24-track studio in New York, and it just was not for me. What was going on there? It was, it seemed like people were just doing cocaine. They were working crazy hours and just driving themselves until they just collapsed. And I wanted none of that. So I came home and I bought a 4-track machine and started recording.
Gotcha.
And then eventually I built a small studio. And the other big thing was, even before I built the studio, was our Stevie Moore came to New Jersey. And that was 1978.
And so at that point, we're talking, the punk scene is already new wave,
full swing.
Yeah, everything is hopping. You have that New York influence really, coalescing with the British, the second British invasion almost. And so our Stevie Moore comes, how do you get connected with him? Because you did end up playing and recording with him for quite some time,
off and on for 30 years.
Yeah. And so what was, because I know a little bit about him, but what was his, when he came to the area, what was his influence, and what kind of scene was he, involved in, and how did you kind of get involved?
Okay. Well, I had 2 friends, Jim Price and Erwin Chusid. And they were, the 2 of them, along with another guy, were sharing a house that was only about 6 blocks away from me. And they were both involved with WFMU. And a friend of Erwin Chusid's bought him an EP of Stevie's. And I remember going over, to their house one day, and, they had their stereo set up in the living room. And he put on this EP, and the guy had an absolutely dreadful voice, and it was very peculiar, but engaging. And Erwin was totally godsmacked by it. He just thought it was brilliant, and I was kind of scratching my head, but Steve had come up from Nashville, and his father is who has since passed, but he's in the Country Music Hall of Fame. He was the preeminent upright bass player in Nashville. And, so Steve had grown up in a really intense musical environment and had inherited his father's talent. So he could do anything from sonic noise stuff that was totally offensive to these really pretty power pop tunes and even ballads. And then, it'd be like this angular, weird stuff. But over the years, I was in a bunch of different iterations of bands of his. And I, as crazy as he was, and he was not always an easy person to deal with, but I learned a tremendous amount because he had phenomenal ears and had been, like I said, exposed to everything. He was a real omnivore as far as music. So people wonder why I know all these different things about all these different kinds of music and all that. And a lot of that is from hanging around with him.
Yeah. And so your buddies were at the radio station. They were into it. How did you guys meet? How did you end up meeting him and start playing with him?
Well, he was living in Montclair, and they had a friend, a mutual woman named Maxine. And he was actually working at Sam Goody at Livingston Mall.
Oh,
that's
my
where
God.
Steve
Wow.
was working. Yeah. As a matter of fact, if you go poking around on YouTube, Chris Corzin, who's somebody that I did a lot of recording with, still do occasionally. He lives in Florida now for a long time, but he just recently recorded the song. There's even a sort of video on YouTube. The song's called One Long Groove, and it's all about how, at that time, Steve was working at Sam Goody. I was working in a music store, Freehold Music, which was also in Livingston Mall. So I would see Steve there. And really knew them through Jim Price and Erwin Chusid. This mutual friend who also worked at Sam Goody had introduced them, and now they were all hanging out together, and I'd go over there and hang out with them. And I had a 4-track tape machine. So Steve borrowed that for, I remember, a 4th of July weekend, I think, and did a whole cassette. Cassettes were the thing at that time, of music that he all did on my 4-track machine. And then we ended up doing some recording together, and we did that over and over again over the years, and then live dates, mostly Maxwell's, but we also played in the city, so yeah, that was. And Dennis Dykin, I guess, is another.
I was gonna ask, like, how, because I mean, talking to Mark Moran, and it seems like you know everybody,
well, around here, anyway.
That's what I'm saying. But like, you've played with some amazing, musicians, and like all the good ones for the most part. So like, obviously the Smithereens were huge. And like, did you know Dennis before they got big? And like, so were you playing gigs, not like obviously with him, but like, on the same lineups?
Actually,
and stuff?
was.
Oh, you were in the same band.
What happened was, he was friends with another local band, a local bar band. And sometimes their drummer couldn't make it, and the drummer was an old friend of his, who something of a mentor. He was a little older than us, and had been in a popular New Jersey band called Jersey Central, and so his name's Bobby Zeiss, and so Bobby Zeiss was playing with these guys. They were called the Zoo Crew, and Bobby was playing with them, and he kind of wanted some time off, so Dennis would sub for him as a drummer with these guys. And Tommy, who was the bass player in that band, was a bartender, and he would get called into work, and he couldn't play some gigs. So it ended up a couple of times me and Dennis playing together, with me on bass and Dennis on drums, with the Joe and John were the 2 guitar players. So me on bass and Dennis on drums. So he knew me a little bit from that. But then the other weird coincidence, the recording studio that I worked at in the city, it was called Chelsea. It was on 23rd Street. And the Smithereens cut their first EP there. I didn't work on the session, but I set up for it.
Oh,
and
wow.
I had, I just sort of rubbed elbows with them on the way, me going out and them walking in, So, but then when I saw the EP, they were playing at the Dirt Club, and I saw the EP, and I saw it was recorded at Chelsea Sound, where I worked, and I was like, I remember these guys. And I struck up a conversation with their bass player, Mike, and and I got to know them all eventually, because they played the Dirt Club a bunch of times. So that's kind of how I got to know them all. So I was friends with them before they really hit, and then I guess around the time that I played with Dennis, I think they had recorded their first album, first bona fide album, especially for you, but it hadn't been released yet. So that's around the time that I got to know them.
Gotcha. And were they at the time like one of the few bands that was making it out of this area, or were there other bands, and like kind of was, because every once in a while, like each city or each area will have some sort of explosion.
Right.
So I didn't know if it was just like they were one of, like they were the special one.
There were a ton of bands. There was a guy who named Alan Betrock, and he financed a lot of original bands that he liked, 12-inch 4-song EPs. And he did that for the Smithereens. They had one called Beauty and Sadness. And then he also there was a band that I was friends with called Winter Hours. I worked with the drummer. We worked at Robbie's together, which is, by the way, where I met Ruth. But Robbie's, John Albanese was their drummer. And so I got to know those guys. Bob Perry ended up working on the road with the Smithereens, as a tech, I think. He was one of the guitar players in Winter Hours. But they made a bunch of 4-song EPs. They were a lot like REM, kind of in that bag. so so that's how I knew it's how I knew the Smithereens, but there were a lot of other bands that came through the Dirt Club. I mean, bands like Wall of Voodoo played at the Dirt Club. Jonathan Richman played at the Dirt
Yeah.
Club. And I played there with Stevie, and I also played there with Brass Tacks, which was the band that I had with Chris Corson, and Ruth was the keyboard player. And that's probably, that band existed from about 86 to 90 was our last gig, but that was the horn section and all that,
Yeah.
that was fun stuff.
That's actually, honestly, I didn't even know you and Ruth played in the same band. I didn't, I knew, she sang and stuff like that, but I didn't know that you guys played in the same band together.
Well, when I was working at Robbie's at that point, which is how I knew Albanese, and it's also, I met Bob Purry there. That's where I met Dave Amos, who I later on did a lot of stuff with. Yeah, Ruth came in there, and she was at that time playing in an all-girl band in France in the summer.
Oh, wow.
And she had come into the store to buy a wah-wah fuzz pedal for the guitar player in her band over. That's how we met. But she was hanging around the store, and her brother, who's also, he's a composer and great keyboard player. He lives he used to live in Nashville. Now he lives in Tennessee, but kind of out on the outskirts now. But Mark had just been buying synthesizers, and I guess Ruth was kind of curious and looking at the synthesizers. And so that's how we met. And then, I was still working at Robbie's. And so for, I guess, Christmas, I bought her a synthesizer. And so she was in, Brass Tacks with me, before we got married. And then, that Chris Corson, who's been a songwriting partner of mine off and on since then. This was all, I guess, from 84 on. And actually, Chris I'd known a little bit longer because I worked, in Livingston Mall, probably from 80 or 81, because he knew I had a previous girlfriend. And anyway, me and Chris have done a bunch of different things. That was Brass Tacks, and we've done some other recordings together since then.
Cool.
And off and on.
So was Brass Tacks, I guess, an original, like you said, there's a horn section. So what kind of music was
original music? I mean, we did a lot of cover tunes, but we also did a record that we pressed up,
Yeah.
And I wrote some of the songs, and so did Chris.
Oh, nice.
And
was it like, what kind of style was it? Was it
It was pop. I mean, live we would do some Motown covers, and we were doing, we tended to do more like pop stuff that had orchestrations on it, because there'd be horns on a lot of pop records back then. It wasn't just R&B or jazz.
Right.
The obvious thing to have done would have been to Chicago, and we didn't do any, but we did do some Motown. And we also did Beatles, stuff that had orchestrations on it. And that's kind of, I would say the record was pop and a little bit R&B influenced. It was only 7 songs. It was on a 12-inch. And so we wrote, it wasn't that good of a record. But at that point I had my little recording studio too. So,
and was the goal, I mean, I'm just curious because, obviously you're in your 20s by this point, late 20s,
right.
Early 30s. And was the goal still to get signed to kind of make it in the,
would have been nice. And back then it was more of a possibility than it became later. I mean, once, you're still talking pre-Napster, which is when the record industry really started to collapse, I mean, that wasn't the only reason, but yeah, in 86, there were still bands getting signed and stuff, that was still going on. I think it was just, me and Chris wrote. So, what do you do when you write?
Right.
You record and you make records.
Yeah.
It would have been nice if somebody would have signed us, but that wasn't going to happen. So,
no, I'm just curious because it feels like sometimes, people say, okay, at this point, if we don't make it, I'm just shutting it down, or some people just keep trying, and it's I
Right.
just was wondering what the mentality was, because
Well,
obviously, go ahead.
well, I was going to say the craziest thing was, I mean, I was never going to stop. I'm still never going to stop playing
Yeah.
music until I really can't. Whenever that is, if ever, I may die before that happens. But I really thought that, by the time I was in my 40s, I was really kind of figuring, well, this is nothing much is going to happen. At this point, who wants to sign 40-year-old new artist? And then that doesn't happen, and the industry was getting shakier and shakier all along, as if there was ever a time when it was easy.
Right.
It was always like winning the lottery. But that said, a lot of the most interesting things that I got to do when I was middle aged. So go figure. That's when I got to play. I guess in the late '90s is when I got to play the Bottom Line with. We had kind of a cabal of musicians who all did original music and stuff, and we played the music. Actually, that goes back to Erwin Chusa, the guy who was associated with FMU, was representing the music of Raymond Scott.
I don't know.
Raymond Scott, well, the way you would know him is a lot of his music got used on Warner Brothers cartoons.
Okay.
It's a particular piece called Powerhouse.
Yep.
Dun, 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 dun. That's a Raymond Scott.
Yep.
So, so Irwin at that point was representing his catalog, and so he arranged 2 shows that we did. And we weren't the only multiple artists, but at Bottom Line, I got to do that. And the band that I played with at that point, we had the moniker the Reckless Penguins. And the lineup was Dennis Dyken on drums. Chris Butler, who was the leader of the Waitresses, was one of the guitar players. I played guitar and banjo. Bob Brainan, who was a radio personality on WFMU, played with us. Dave Amos played keyboards. I'm trying to think. Oh, and Enrico Granife, we had him as a soloist playing chromatic harmonica. I know you've been to Trumpets.
Yes.
When it was open. Enrico was one of the owners, and he's always been a dear friend. He and his wife and Ruth and I were newlyweds together, and we used to go and see music in New York and stuff before we had kids. But Enrico is a brilliant harmonica player, chromatic. He is, I think, the only person that ever was a student of Toots Thielemans, he did the music from Midnight Cowboy.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting. And you can find video of that on YouTube. Or Stevie Moore had it's pretty crude, but it exists, which is kind of cool. Of us at the Bottom Line.
Very cool. So with that, because I was going to ask, like, did you ever have like a quote unquote rock star moment, like a true rock star, or is this really happening moment, or was the Bottom Line like kind of like that?
That's a big one. The show that we did with Jim Yester, that was pretty huge. Working with an orchestra, that was pretty amazing. I've done shows. I actually did front the Smithereens once.
Oh wow!
That was kind of a weird thing. Pat had fallen and he thought he broke a rib. He was in the hospital, and Jimmy and Dennis were on their way to do it was what they call a soft ticket event. They weren't the featured act. It was a ski weekend that they were doing for, I think, Miller Lite or something like that. And, so it's free ski weekend. One of the things that they had the Smithereens is the entertainment. And Pat had fallen and injured himself. Dennis and Jimmy were already on their way there. Severo, who was playing bass with them at that time, I think had already flown in to New Jersey. He lives out in California. And so all of a sudden they don't have a front man lead singer. So they called all kinds of people that they knew, I guess, probably people like Marshall Crenshaw, who works with them now.
Yeah.
Darius Rucker, I think.
Really?
Yeah. Hootie and the Blowfish apparently were Smithereens fans. And I think before they hit, I think they might have covered some of their stuff. So they tried him, but everybody that they called was not available. So they were scraping the bottom of the barrel. I got a call at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, and I didn't have a gig, and I didn't have a gig the next day. They said, "Can you be in Pittsburgh, tomorrow in the afternoon?" So threw my stuff in the car and started driving.
Oh wow.
You know, that's a long ride.
Were you like listening to their music on the whole ride out? Like,
Didn't have time really because I had to just get there. So I got there and got like an hour or two of sleep, and then me and Jimmy sat down, and we couldn't pick up the whole. I knew a couple of Smithereens tunes,
yeah.
and they were big Who fans, so we did some Who covers.
Oh, nice.
We opened up. I remember we opened up with Substitute. So yeah, that was pretty cool. And I've done a lot of things with Dennis.
Yeah.
Um, and he played on my CD, as did Graham Maybe, which was
Yeah, that's another guy. I mean, he's Joe Jackson's bass player. Like, he is the bass player of Joe Jackson.
the guy.
Like that bass line on Time is iconic. And
Right. And is she really going out with him? That just
boom,
doo doo doo. Yeah, no, his bass playing on those first two albums is right up front.
Yeah.
He's kind of the linchpin of a lot of those songs, sonically, but a sweeter person you'd never meet.
Yeah.
He was, I ended up doing a session with him, something that Dave Amos set up, and that was the first time that I met him. And turns out his daughter and Laura were born a day apart, and he had a son who was 6 months older than Chris.
Yeah.
So we had that in common. But yeah, he was over here at the house. He was down in this basement here.
I actually played with his son. His son went to Apple Farm when I worked there, and he was in a band that I was working with. And I didn't realize that you knew him at the time. His son was telling me, like, oh yeah, like my dad's, like, that's his bass playing, because I think they had listened. Someone had mentioned like the Anthrax version of Time, and then he's like, that was my dad's like original like bass line, and
Right.
And so yeah, everything came together a few years later. But so you've recorded many solo albums, and you still do.
Yeah, 2016 was the last release that I had, and that was that was No Promises, and Dennis is on that, as is Graham. That was the rhythm section that cut all the tracks, and Ed Alstrom played on it, and Steve Gechter, who we were in a band with, great singer and solid keyboard player. We'd been in the Upsiders together, and Jim Mastro guested on one track.
Yeah.
So
my question is like, you probably write tons and tons of songs constantly.
Yeah, still right.
And so over time, like, even not just now but before, when did you, like, when was how did you know it was time to record an album, and when did you make that decision? And what it was like, was it just like, I got enough songs now, let me put it out? Like, what was the impetus for putting out the albums?
What made me able to do it and want to do it at that time, the last one that I did, was the fact that I was still playing with the Coots,
right?
But I was also in Yesterdays, and Yesterdays, it was an oldies band, but we made good money, and so I had the money, and I had recorded other people's records and done other people's stuff with my home studio, but I always wanted to do it without any compromises. And I loved working at Mozart's studio, and I had worked on a project there for somebody else, and I loved working with Kostadin, and then I bought a project there, Mike Mitch, Lagan's Love. I produced a record for him there because I saw how good he was. Mike was inexperienced, and I saw what a good engineer Kostadin was, but also how good he was with people.
Oh yeah, my band recorded with him twice.
Yeah,
it was great.
Phenomenal guy.
Yeah,
Anyway, so I loved working with him. I still think he's, at some point the world is going to catch on to how brilliant he is,
Well,
because
didn't he just win wasn't he nominated for a Grammy? Like with the
Grammy.
work? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. But I mean, he has a lot of jazz musicians
Oh
record
yeah.
there.
I mean, I remember when we recorded there, I was like, oh, Lenny White's drums are here.
Yep.
Like the guy from Return to Forever and who played with Miles Davis, like his drums are just here. I think, and Stanley Clark has recorded there.
Yep.
And yeah, it's I was just shocked.
Enrico's done several CDs there. Yeah. And he has a lot of, I mean, he has a lot of people coming from different places, Latin stuff that he does there. And he does a lot of rock and roll, and he's just, he loves it all. He does a great job on all of it, Anyways, so I knew where I wanted to do it. And at the time I had the money, the disposal, and I spent a lot of money making that record. Because I wanted to make a record that was, to me, of the quality of the records that I listened to. And, being chief cook and bottle washer, trying to be the engineer and the artist and the singer and the songwriter and, and cobble it all together and record it on your own, I wanted to be the artist and go in, have the players that I wanted, and have somebody else do the engineering. And I was financially able to do it at that point. So that's how it got made and why. And it's also part of the reason why I wouldn't make another one that way, because there's no place to sell it. Nobody buys CDs anymore.
Yeah.
So, I think that's why major artists that are already filthy rich, they can afford to make records. But to make records the way that you want to make a good, when you're an artist who's made stuff with a fully professional studio with a great engineer and a great producer, do you want to come down to doing stuff at home on a laptop in your underwear? That's why do that?
Yeah.
So I think there's really not a lot of reason for most artists to record anymore.
Yeah. And, back in the day, in like the 80s and 90s and, early 2000s, when you were still writing stuff, was it just like getting the stuff out, or was it really just like, let's just make a record and see what happens?
Right. Pretty much that. That's why the title of the record is No Promises, because I didn't expect anything out of it other than I would finally get to do a record the way I wanted to. I produced a bunch of recordings for Dan Kirk, who I played in the band with for a while. But Dan's a very prolific songwriter and very talented.
Good writer and illustrator too.
Right, and we made companion records for a bunch of his books.
I have 2 of them at my house.
Right, and so that was all done here. We did the theme for Weird New Jersey or Weird US. That was recorded here.
Did not know that.
Yeah, that was recorded here. I'm trying to think of what else. I lose track of this stuff. You keep doing it and you don't even remember after a while. We did a couple of things. I did something with Michael Shelley here. We, this kind of ad hoc bunch of people that we record with. It wasn't done here, but there's a guy named Bingo Gazingo. We did an album of Bingo Gazingo's music for WFMU. They had a label briefly, and Bingo Gazingo was like this crazy poet guy that apparently fell in with a bunch of New York punkers and stuff, and crazy eccentric. But again, it was like this cabal of me, R. Stevie Moore, Dave Ingles, Dennis Dykin, Chris Butler. At one point, I think Bob Brainerd was affiliated with us, and somebody at one point dubbed us the Pop Mafia because at one point, this would be in kind of the mid-late 90s, there's just all these different projects that were going on, and we were all on all of them. I played on a Chris Butler track, and for a record that he did, and lots of R. Stevie Moore stuff, and and I worked on tracks with Dennis. I actually co-wrote something that's on a Smithereens Christmas record.
Oh, cool.
And and there's another song. There's actually a song called "Bear in My Garden," which we did before the whole Ukraine thing happened, but it really, it was kind of apropos, and somebody made up a video, and it's on YouTube, using the song "Bear in My Garden," which we did for Bear Family Records, uh, um, and under the moniker of Bell Sound. That was Dennis's side project, but that was mostly me and him and Dave, me and Dennis and Dave, and I did all the guitars on that, and I think we recorded that at Dennis's.
Cool.
Yeah,
and you kept bringing FMU up. Did you did any of your stuff ever get played on there? Did you ever do any, obviously with R. Stevie Moore, you probably performed stuff.
Lots of the stuff I did with R. Stevie Moore.
But like, did any of your personal solo stuff get played on the radio?
Some, because they don't, they have a program director, but pretty much every show is
right. It's freeform, literally
freeform radio. So, Jim Price played some of my stuff. Irene Trudell a little bit. I'm trying to think of it. 3-Chord Monty, that show, they played some of my stuff. When the CD came out. There were people, if it was in there, it was on their radar. If it, because the record is, it's a fairly pop record, and not everybody, some of the stuff that they play on FMU. I can't imagine it being on certain shows, but yeah, there were a few people that did. Joe Belock played it, and trying to think, it's terrible. I can't think of his name. Bill Kelly supported it, and he is also now on Underground Garage. He's on one of the Sirius stations.
Oh, cool.
So yeah.
So I got to ask, because obviously I understand it, but for you, what keeps you going? Like, what keeps you just wanting to play and gig as much as possible? Because you're gigging all the time. You're playing. Yeah. You play almost every weekend. During COVID, you were putting on,
tomorrow
concerts.
And I'm playing Friday.
Yeah. So, like, what drives you, or is it just an internal thing?
I enjoy performing, and it's a funny kind of thing, because obviously I have this huge catalog of my own music, but I don't. People get. I've never understood why people are like, either you're in a cover band or you're in an original band, and never the twain shall meet. Well, why not? The Beatles were a cover band,
right?
It's some of the best musicians that you'll ever hear of. To be, Tom Petty did a bunch of covers live, and if you ever listen to his station, the whole Buried Treasures thing, the guy is obviously a huge music fan. I think most good songwriters and most good musicians have to be good music fans, right. Because where do you draw your inspiration from? What gets you going? What lights your fuse? That's one of the first questions you ask me is, so what was it that got you going? Well, everybody has something that gets them going, and your heroes, I think, as long as you live, they stay your heroes. I'm always going to be, unfortunately, I'll never get a chance to really spend time with Alex Chilton, because he's, across the Rainbow Bridge, but, Todd Rundgren will always be a hero. And, that doesn't mean I love everything that he's doing these days, but he's made so much music that had a huge impact on me. The music, I'll always be a Pete Townsend fan. Right. That stuff's always going to be somewhere in the background.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I love playing. I love seeing if I can cajole an audience into to having a great time.
Yeah,
I think that's one of the best jobs you can have.
Yeah, I play with you a bunch, and it's always fun to play with you, and I know you put on a good show. So it's it's obviously something that you have in you and you love doing. And I was just curious, because some people do get burned out, and obviously You haven't, and you're
Not
going
I.
strong.
At least not yet.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I mean, there's when I really, I've said it over and over again, and it's really how I feel about it. The day that I am no longer enjoying it and that it becomes a job is the day that I walk away from it.
Yeah.
And that I'm nowhere near there yet,
Yep.
you know, I may not always be able to jump around like an idiot, but as long as I can deliver a decent show, as long as my voice holds up, and as long as I can play reasonably well, I'm going to keep doing it. And if that means at some point I'm entertaining, 90-year-olds in an old folks home, well, okay, so be it. There's worse ways to go out.
Yeah.
You make it easy to want you. You make it easy to care. I tried so many times and I never got it right, but I swear.
At the end of each episode, I like to ask my guests what they've been listening to lately. So who are 3 artists, or what are some songs that you've been enjoying lately? It does not have to be new stuff. It can be old stuff, but what have you've kind of been, gravitating to recently?
As far as younger artists, I really like the Lemon Twigs.
Yes.
I think
great.
they're tremendously talented. I have met them. They are Stevie Moore fans, among other things. Their father is Ronnie D'Addario, and he made records and was a singer-songwriter himself.
Yeah.
So I think they grew up on. They had it in their DNA, and they got educated good.
Yeah.
And they just make great sounding records, and they have great voices. They play well. I think that's that. I'm real high on. I think it's astounding to me that I'm still hearing Tom Petty stuff that I've never heard before. He recorded all the time, and there's still stuff trickling out. And something will pop up either on his show, or I was just going through stuff on YouTube and I heard something. I can't remember the title of the song. I was like, this is another great song by him,
Yeah.
because I'm more song driven than anything else. I've played in blues jams. I'm not a bluesman.
Yeah.
I'm a post middle aged white guy. I never got how people like my age and older and even younger consider themselves some kind of purist.
Right.
To me, you have to have been raised in a shack down in Mississippi or something. That ain't us. The blues up here is, I can't afford the payments on my BMW.
Well, they chased her down the alley and over the hill to steal her will. She was hot as Georgia asphalt.
So yeah, Tom Petty is still perennial. And then I've been actually, if you look in the back, it's my new synthesizer.
Oh yeah, I was checking that out. That looks great.
That's an Arturia, and actually the thing under I don't know if you can see the bullfight thing here, but there's another keyboard under there. That's an 88 key Roland synth.
Nice.
And polyphonic. But yeah, I'm getting back into synthesizers again.
Nice.
So yeah, I've been listening again to some of the old electronic music that I used to listen to.
Oh, cool.
Larry Fast, and I mean, again, being a Todd Rundgren fan, part of that was Roger Powell was brilliant, and I had some of his solo records that he did. One that he did before he was with Utopia, but he also made some other stuff later on.
Cool.
So that stuff is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Those textures, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Chris, you know, this was going to happen at some point. I'm glad we were able to make this happen. Thank you so much for coming on to Dad Rocks, and you know, we'll see each other soon.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode, and special thanks again to Chris Bolger for coming on to the show. If you'd like to follow Chris on social media, you can find him on Facebook. He's only on there. He's not on Instagram or Twitter or anything else. But he's known for doing a lot of live videos of his performances on Facebook. So definitely check him out there if you are on that social media platform. You can find Chris's most recent album, No Promises, on Spotify or any other major streaming service. And the song that was played early on in the show was actually from an album he did with the band The Coots, which that album it includes several songs Chris wrote and sings lead on. So you can definitely check that out as well, which you can find that also on Spotify or other streaming services. If you enjoyed what you heard, I would love for you to subscribe to the show and would really appreciate it if you left an honest review, or, you know, just tell a friend or two about the show. If you'd like to follow the show on social media, we're on Instagram, Threads, and X, all at Dad Rocks Pod, and we are also on Facebook just by searching up Dad Rocks Podcast. If you have any questions, comments, or any show ideas, please just email me at dadrockspod@gmail.com. You can also just email me and say, hello, hey, this is a great show. If you want to check out the music you've heard on this episode in full, there's a Spotify playlist which should be linked in the podcast description. Once again, thanks for listening today, and thank you for listening overall over these last 4+ years. And remember, dads, you rock.